In the world of business, there are stories of success, stories of failure, and then there are the stories that hide in plain sight. This is a story about a company you think you know. Amazon, the everything store, a global empire of cardboard boxes and two-day shipping that redefined commerce itself. But what if that entire empire, the one we see and use every day, was just a front? A massive, complex, and barely profitable distraction designed to hide the real story. What if we told you there is another company built in secret inside of Amazon that is so powerful and so profitable it makes the entire retail business look like a side project? This is the story of the secret company inside Amazon that's bigger than Amazon. To understand the secret, you first have to understand the chaos. Before it was an empire, Amazon was a survivor. In the early 2000s, the digital landscape was a graveyard of dot-com companies that had promised the world and delivered nothing. Amazon was different. It was still standing, fueled by one simple, all-consuming philosophy: get big fast. And it was working. Every day, the digital bookstore grew, adding new categories, new customers, and new complexity. From the outside, it looked like a runaway success, but inside, the company was choking on its own growth. The technology that powered the website, the very heart of the business, was a tangled, unpredictable mess. Internally, engineers had a name for it: the spaghetti monolith. A single, gigantic piece of code where every part was connected to every other part. A change in the code for the shopping cart could accidentally break the system for recommending books. Adding a new feature was like performing surgery in the dark. It was slow, it was risky, and it was fragile. The obsession with getting big fast had created a monster. A single developer making a single mistake could bring the entire website and the entire business crashing down. And it happened. The site would go down, sales would stop, and engineers would scramble for hours, sometimes days, to untangle the mess. The company was literally being held together with digital duct tape. The bigger Amazon got, the more the cracks began to show. The monster was starting to win. The very engine of growth was becoming a fatal flaw, threatening to implode the entire company. How can a business that promises to be the future of commerce survive if its own foundation is built on sand? This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a patch or a quick fix. It was a crisis that reached the very top. In a moment of legendary frustration, Jeff Bezos issued a mandate, a decree that would change everything. From that point forward, the spaghetti monolith was dead. Every team would now build its technology in the form of small, independent, and completely separate services. It wasn't a grand vision for the future. It wasn't a stroke of genius aimed at building a new product. It was a desperate, last-ditch act of survival, a decision made not to build an empire, but simply to keep the walls from collapsing. The mandate had been given. The monolith was to be dismantled. But issuing a command is one thing. Executing it is another. The task of untangling the mess fell to a select group of engineers and a young executive named Andy Jassy. Their mission wasn't to build a product for the public. It was far less glamorous. They were essentially the plumbers of the digital age, sent into the basement to fix the pipes. They needed to tear apart Amazon's chaotic infrastructure and rebuild it as a set of clean, hardened, independent pieces. They called these pieces primitives. Think of them not as finished rooms in a house, but as the raw materials, the bricks, the wood, the cement. One primitive for storage, one primitive for computing power, one for databases. The idea was that any team inside Amazon could take these raw materials and build whatever they needed, instantly, without asking for permission and without breaking the rest of the system. It was difficult, grinding work. But as the months went on and the primitives began to take shape, something strange happened. The team looked at what they had built, and they looked at the world outside, and they realized they were looking at a mirror image. Every company, from the smallest dorm room startup to the largest Fortune 500 giant, was fighting the exact same battle Amazon had just fought. They were all spending millions of dollars and wasting thousands of hours just to buy servers, set up racks, and hire teams to manage them. They were all building their own drilling rigs just to keep the lights on. And that was the spark, the realization that changed the course of business history. Amazon was a retailer. They sold books and DVDs and electronics. But to do that, they had been forced to become experts in running massive, complex data centers. They had inadvertently become one of the most sophisticated infrastructure companies on Earth. It was a classic accidental oil strike. Imagine a company that drills for oil solely to fuel its own delivery trucks. One day, they look at their reserves and realize they have found more oil than they could use in 1,000 lifetimes. Do they cap the well? Or do they become an energy company? Amazon decided to become an energy company. The pitch was audacious, bordering on insane. Why would a retailer sell its own secret sauce? Why would they invite the world to run their businesses on Amazon's back? But the logic was ruthless. If Amazon didn't do it, someone else would. Google, Microsoft, or IBM would eventually figure this out. By moving first, by turning their biggest cost center into a revenue generator, they could monetize the very internet itself. So, without a splashy keynote, without a Super Bowl commercial, and without even a press conference, they turned the key. In 2006, they quietly launched Simple Storage Service, or S3. Shortly after came the Elastic Compute Cloud, or EC2. The names were technical, boring, and utterly functional. To the average person, it looked like nothing, just a few lines of code on a simple web page. But to a developer, it was magic. Suddenly, you didn't need a capital budget. You didn't need a data center. You just needed a credit card. You could rent a supercomputer for pennies an hour and turn it off when you were done. Amazon had built the ultimate utility. They had laid the power lines for a new digital century. But as they flipped the switch, opening their massive capabilities to anyone with an internet connection, a quiet question lingered in the background. By making this power accessible to everyone, were they creating a new market? Or were they arming the very companies that would one day try to destroy them? The door was open, and the first people to walk through it weren't the big banks or the government agencies. It was a new generation of dreamers who were about to use Amazon's own weapons to rewrite the rules of the game. When Amazon Web Services first flickered to life, the titans of industry didn't notice. IBM, Microsoft, and Oracle were too busy selling multi-million-dollar server contracts to Fortune 500 companies to worry about a book retailer offering storage for pennies. They saw it as a toy, a hobbyist's tool. They were wrong. While the giants slept, a revolution was beginning in the garages and coffee shops of Silicon Valley. Before AWS, if you wanted to build a tech company, you needed capital, serious capital. You had to buy racks of servers, rent space in a data center, and hire a team to keep it all running before you even wrote a line of code. It was a gatekeeper that kept the little guys out. But Amazon kicked the gate down. They introduced a model that seems obvious now, but was radical then. Pay as you go. Suddenly, two guys in a dorm room didn't need $1 million, they just needed a credit card. They could spin up 10 servers to test an idea, and if it failed, they could shut them down and pay nothing more. But if it worked, if it went viral, they could scale from 10 servers to 10,000 in minutes. This was the oxygen that fueled the unicorn era. Companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, and Uber didn't build their own infrastructure. They didn't have to. They built their empires on rented land. They were running on Amazon's metal. And as these startups exploded into global giants, they dragged AWS up with them. Amazon wasn't just a retailer anymore, it was the invisible engine room of the entire internet economy. But this unrivaled dominance created a strange, almost paradoxical situation. Amazon was becoming a platform for everyone, including the very companies that wanted to destroy them. Take Netflix. By 2010, Reed Hastings was building the ultimate streaming service, a direct existential threat to Amazon's own ambitions in video. Logic dictates that you crush your competition, you squeeze them, you deny them resources. But Amazon did the opposite. They welcomed Netflix with open arms. Netflix moved its entire streaming operation onto AWS. Every time you binge-watched a show on Netflix, you were technically using Amazon's computers. It seemed like madness. Why would Jeff Bezos hand his sharpest sword to his biggest rival? The answer lies in the sheer scale of the ambition. Amazon realized that the war for streaming subscribers was just a skirmish. The real war was for the infrastructure of the world. By hosting Netflix, Amazon guaranteed that they would profit no matter who won the streaming wars. If Prime Video won, Amazon made money. If Netflix won, Amazon still made money. They had effectively rigged the game. By the mid-2010s, the trap was set. AWS had become the utility of the digital age, as essential as electricity or running water. But unlike a power company which everyone knows and pays, AWS remained in the shadows, buried deep in Amazon's financial reports. The world saw the packages on their doorsteps, but they missed the monster growing in the ledger. And that raises the question, if this side project was quietly powering the biggest companies on Earth, just how much money was it actually making? The answer was a secret that Amazon kept guarded for nearly a decade, hiding the true source of its power from Wall Street, from its competitors, and perhaps most importantly, from the regulators. But secrets like that can't be kept forever. For nearly 20 years, Amazon was the most frustrating paradox on Wall Street. It was a juggernaut of revenue, a company that seemed to devour every industry it touched, yet it made almost no actual money. Jeff Bezos preached the gospel of the long term, famously telling investors to ignore the quarterly profits and focus on the growth. But by 2015, even the true believers were getting restless. To the financial analysts in New York, Amazon looked like a low-margin retailer fighting a war of attrition. They saw a company spending billions to build warehouses, hire armies of workers, and subsidize shipping costs, all to sell books and blenders for pennies on the dollar. They looked at the balance sheet and saw a business walking a razor-thin line between success and insolvency. They thought they understood the risks. They didn't realize they were looking at the wrong numbers. The mask finally slipped on April 23, 2015. It was a Thursday afternoon. The markets had just closed and Amazon released its quarterly earnings report. For years, Amazon had lumped all its technology revenue into a vague category called Other. But on this day, for the first time in history, they decided to break out the financials for Amazon Web Services as a standalone line item. The world expected to see a nice, respectable side business. Maybe it was breaking even, maybe it was losing money to fund growth. What they saw instead dropped jaws from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. In that quarter alone, AWS had generated $1.57 billion in revenue. But the revenue wasn't the headline. The headline was the profit. While Amazon's massive world-spanning retail operation, the part of the company with the trucks, the boxes, and the Super Bowl ads, was scraping by with operating margins of around 1%, AWS was operating at a stunning 17% margin. The realization hit the market like a thunderclap. This side project, this computer rental service, was on track to become the most profitable business in the history of modern technology. Suddenly, the math of Amazon made sense. The mystery of how Jeff Bezos could afford to undercut competitors, survive massive losses on shipping, and launch expensive moonshots like the Kindle and the Echo was solved. He wasn't defying the laws of economics, he was cheating them. AWS was the bank. It was a cash-printing machine hidden in the basement that paid for the mansion upstairs. The high-margin profits from the cloud were subsidizing the low-margin dominance of the store. Every time Amazon crushed a competitor on price, it was because AWS was footing the bill. This revelation fundamentally changed how we understand corporate power. Amazon wasn't a retailer supported by a tech division. It was a ruthless, high-tech monopoly burdened by a retail store. The messy superstore we saw in Chapter 1 had successfully birthed a golden goose. With a profit engine this powerful and this secure, one has to wonder, if AWS could quietly fund the conquest of retail for a decade, what other industries is Amazon preparing to disrupt right now, paid for by the invisible tax we all pay to the cloud? The secret company was no longer a secret. It was revealed as the true heart of the empire. Amazon had pulled off the greatest magic trick in business history. They built a trillion-dollar reality right in front of our eyes, while the whole world was busy watching the cardboard boxes. The next time you see that smiling arrow on your doorstep, remember, that is not where the power lies. The real empire is invisible, silent, and everywhere.